Welcome to the next episode on how to fly a helicopter in a sim. Today we are going to deal with climb, cruise and descent. By gently pushing forward the cyclic, we can translate from a stable hover to forward flight. In a steady hover, the rotor produces sufficient thrust to keep the helicopter in the air. Now if we move forward, some of that thrust is going to be deflected into forward acceleration. As a consequence, the helicopter will sink and we need to pull in a little collective in order to keep our altitude. Remember that you might have to push in a little bit of left pedal when you raise collective. Alright, let's give it a go. Stick forward a little bit of collective and keep the nose straight. Whoops, something happened. The aircraft rolled to the right. I'm going to explain to you why. This is called the transverse flow effect. As the aircraft accelerates, the rear portion of the rotor disc produces more lift. An effect called gyroscopic precession causes that lift to be offset by about 90 degrees, making the left portion of the rotor disc rise and tilting the aircraft to the right. To us, that means that once we gain forward speed, we need to be prepared to push in a little bit of left cyclic to counteract that tendency. Let's try again. I now compensate with a little bit of left cyclic for the tendency of the helicopter to roll to the right. Due to increased effectiveness of the tail rotor and horizontal stabilizers, also be prepared to ease off on your power pedal. As we gain more speed, the aircraft now suddenly has a tendency to roll to the left. With sufficient airflow meeting the aircraft, the advancing blade will produce more lift than the retreating blade. With its anti-clockwise spinning rotors, the advancing blade on the 206 is on the right side in forward flight, causing the aircraft to tilt to the left. We again oppose that with a little bit of right cyclic. Now when the rotor leaves its own vortices behind and moves into undisturbed air, its aerodynamic effectiveness increases and produces more lift. This is called effective translational lift, and it can save your day if you're very close to your maximum takeoff weight. Now not every helicopter flight model out there will simulate these effects, but a good one should. Now in cruise flight, we basically keep our altitude and we usually go for the fastest speed at maximum continuous power. What that speed is depends on your helicopter design, your load status, and the prevailing wind. Now let's see what our flight controls do when we're in level flight. Now to get into a climb or descent situation, we can either use our cyclic stick or our collective. Let's see what happens if we raise the collective. We can see the nose of the helicopter pitching up. That means if I want to keep my altitude while accelerating at the same time, I would raise collective and push the stick forward. If you keep the attitude of the helicopter the same while pulling in collective, you will climb. Now let's see what happens if we lower the collective. Surprise, the nose will drop. So if I want to slow down the aircraft while keeping the same altitude, I need to gently push back on the stick while I lower the collective. Also, if you keep the attitude of the helicopter the same while lowering the collective, you will descend. You can also use the cyclic to initiate a climb or a descent. However, keep in mind, if you climb with cyclic only, you will bleed off speed. If you descend with cyclic, you will gain speed. That's it for the cruise. The aircraft pretty much behaves like a fixed-wing aircraft would, and it basically flies itself. Keep an eye out on your instruments, especially the torque gauge, your temperatures, and your fuel. Yes, that was the yellow light that came on earlier. We're low on fuel out on the ocean. Now we're going to hop over to the approach phase. Approaching a certain spot sometimes can be difficult. You don't want to come in too high and too fast. You don't want to come in too low and too slow. I'm going to show you a little tip that you can use to make your approach just perfect. We're approaching a little helipad on the beautiful island of Mahé, Seychelles. The first thing I do is slow down the aircraft for a good approach speed, maybe 65 knots. And I do that by keeping the attitude of the helicopter the same while lowering collective. Notice while I lower collective that I need to push in a little bit of right pedal to keep the aircraft in trim. I'm going to initiate my descent by lowering the collective even more, pushing in a little bit more, right pedal if needed, and pull aft on the cyclic to keep the same attitude. I don't want a nose to drop, so I will sink too quickly. I want a slow and steady descent. Now here's a little trick. Try to keep the spot that you are aiming for, in our case the helipad, at approximately the same position on your windscreen. If the aiming point moves down on my windscreen, so closer to the main panel, that means I'm coming in too high. Vice versa, if it creeps up my windscreen, that means I'm coming in too low. With that little trick, it should be easy peasy for you to fly your best approaches. However, we are going to do a long and shallow approach. Sometimes you need to do a steep approach. Sometimes you might even have to vertically descend into a narrow or confined airspace. I recommend practicing different kinds of approaches to get a feel for your aircraft. If you're on an approach to an unknown landing site, it is also good practice to do 1 or 2 circles to just get familiar with the area and get your act together. Now as we start slowing down into a hover, we are going to lose that effective translational lift. Now when that happens, just remember that you have to pull in collective, and as you do so, pull in left pedal. Now when you're descending in your landing site, also make sure that you do not descend faster than 300 feet per minute below 30 knots. That will ensure that you do not get into your own rotor downwash and experience vortex ring stay. Now if you get in too high and too fast, you better do a go around. Just try again, no shame in that. If you're coming in too low and slow, just add in a little collective and gain a little speed and fly the remaining distance to your landing site. If you're operating your aircraft close to its limits, it is of vital importance to fly good approaches. Alright, that was our little crash course of climb, cruise and descent phases in helicopter flight. I hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned something, and I'll see you around next time.